How would you feel if a member of US Congress stands up for the madrasa education system and terms it a model for US schools? That's exactly what people understood and perceived when Andre Carson, a member of US Congress, spoke before a gathering of Muslims in Washington. Hello, this is Faiz Rahman and you're watching Cafe DC. Congressman, thank you very much for this opportunity.
What an honor.
Let me start by asking this question. Why did you choose politics? I mean, you belong to a very well-known, famous political family. Didn't you see all this gridlock and all this mess in Congress?
I did. Well, I got my start in 1984. Jesse Jackson was running for president. And I had a chance to go out with my grandmother, who then was a state senator, and she was a delegate. And even though he didn't win the nomination, I came back and I was able to register voters, even though I wasn't old enough to vote myself at the time. And so I was kind of bitten by the political bug, if you will. But I never saw myself at that time in Congress. I saw myself as an activist, an entrepreneur, and it was through my young activism and being an agitator outside of the system that I began to really look at ways in which I could probably affect the same kinds of change within the system. And so I had a career in law enforcement. I sat on the city council. Homeland Security, counterterrorism, and counterintelligence. I sat on the city council, and my grandmother passed away while I still served on the council. And I ran for Congress, and there was a push from the community. They knew I came from the community. They were confident in what they saw as my passion for the less fortunate, passion for the poor, passion for the disenfranchised, and passion for creating economic opportunities for the city of Indianapolis and for the state of Indiana. And so through that effort, I've been in Congress for 5 years. I've had 2 pieces of legislation passed by President Obama. And so we're trying to do the good work of serving others.
Very good. You said you were an activist and quote unquote an agitator. From an activist, an active activist and an effective activist to being a congressperson.
Sure.
What's the difference? I mean, now that you're part of a system, do you now empathize with the people outside? And what, has it made you a different person?
Well, both components require organizing people, mobilizing people, galvanizing individuals of different schools of thought, different religious persuasion, different ethnic backgrounds to an agenda. And so it happens on the outside and it happens internally. Both efforts can be just as chaotic. Both efforts can be just as ego-driven and having to herd cats, if you will, and manage different personalities. But I think working internally gives you a different appreciation of how government works and how slow government is. I mean, we tend to be emotional as human beings and we want instant results. Well, the federal government is not like that. The federal government is quite slow in its process.
Can it be faster?
It could be much faster and much more efficient, absolutely. But I think that there are checks and balances in place that allow us to deliberate and debate serious issues and really listen to the other side of the aisle and open ourselves up for persuasive dialogue and a persuasive critique.
Congressman, I was looking at your voting records, and you're pretty liberal.
Sure.
Like 58% of the voting was leaning towards being a liberal
Certainly.
congressperson. And you are a Muslim, sure, and a practicing Muslim at that. And there's a perception out there that someone who is religious cannot be liberal. He or she is conservative. So how do you reconcile between being a good practicing Muslim and a liberal congressman?
Well, I have to do what's best for my constituents and for what's best for Americans and the globe. I try to make those decisions based on my conscience. I try not to, I leave the religious debate to the scholars. I'm not an hafiz, I'm not an imam. I don't consider myself to be a scholar, though I study the religion regularly. But for me, it's about helping others. And I think we can be proud of who we are and we can be proud of our collective faith identities, but we can't allow our different religions, our different cultural backgrounds, our different cultural mythologies to interfere with good legislation.
That'll bring me to a controversy last year.
Yeah.
I hope I can answer that
Let's
question.
do it.
You spoke at ICNA's convention, Islamic Circle of North America, and you made this comment about madrasas, that they could be a good model for U.S. education system. Do you think that the U.S. education system really needs that kind of drastic measures to, to be put back on the tracks?
Well, I could have used a different language. When you say madrasas, there's a certain image that comes to mind, and that is a negative image. What I was trying to say was that given the possibilities that exist with our children in our public schools must be mined correctly. The educational model that we're using is antiquated and outdated. What I have seen in many schools in our country, because my daughter has attended some of these schools part-time, though she goes to a public school, is that some of the Islamic-based schools and Jewish-based schools and Christian-based schools, but particularly in that instance, the Islamic-based schools, they're graduating kids who are bilingual and trilingual. They're graduating kids who go on to Ivy League schools. What might traditional schools learn from their pedagogy and methodology that we could extract in a public school setting? That doesn't mean that we remove separation of church and state. I believe in that strongly. But I'm saying in a time of desperate need, in a time where most of our schools are graduating a percentage of kids who are functionally illiterate, we have to change the paradigm. And whatever means that we could extract it from, we should do so in a way that's thoughtful and in a way that's reasonable and in a way that doesn't encroach on people's civil liberties. So that was the point that I was making. But of course, the right wing took it and
you got a lot of heat for that, right?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. There are hundreds of Islamic schools across America, and more are coming up. Before we continue our interview with Congressman Andre Carson, let's watch a report on Islamic schools here.
I'm ready to give me 5.
These children were born in the United States, second or third generation Muslim Americans, so they are not alien to American culture. Their parents enrolled them in the Muslim American Youth Academy in Dearborn in order to raise them both as Americans and as practicing Muslims. Albert Harb is the Academy's director.
Islam is a multicultural religion. It has been able to promote itself and exist in all cultures worldwide. So what we emphasize that we need to meet with, we emphasize that we are a multicultural religion. We are open to other cultures. We want to interact with people of different faiths in a positive way.
The Academy is a part of the Islamic Center of America and is located between two churches. Hassan Qazwini is the Imam of the Islamic Center, the nation's largest.
We believe that these will be the ambassadors of Islam to non-Muslims. They will be the ones who will be carrying the banner of Islam.
Take turns speaking and listen carefully.
Okay.
Harb says the Academy follows the standards of the Michigan State curriculum.
In addition, we have an Islamic component, a very strong Islamic component. We teach Islam as well as Arabic as a foreign language. It's very important for us to make sure that our kids also know Arabic so they can read the Quran and not only read it but also comprehend it and understand it.
Arabic proficiency has become a national security resource since the terrorist attacks on the United States in 2001. And the Academy's aim is also to produce young Americans who can speak fluent Arabic.
We have preschool up to 8th grade, and we have currently enrolled 368 students. We grew from less than a couple of hundred to 368, alhamdulillah. If this keeps going, we will be adding one grade every year, one grade consecutively every year to our classes.
Muslim Americans across the United States are repeating this experience on different scales, aiming to raise their children to enjoy American culture and keep their own traditions. Mohammed Al-Shinawi, VOA News.
Congressman, you're the grandson of a very successful congresswoman, an African-American congresswoman, and she came from a a constituency in the Midwest,
Yes.
supposedly a conservative. And then you basically ran for the same seat and you became the congressman. So, looking at your background, an African-American congressman, and then for the first time we have an African-American president.
Yes.
What was going through your mind in 2008 first, when for the first time he made that speech, victory speech? You were still, you had run for Congress.
I was a sitting member of Congress.
Sitting member of Congress, 2008. So what was going through your mind? I mean, monumental change in the overall complexion of the society.
Well, 24 years prior to that, as I told you, I was at the Democratic National Convention in support of another African-American, Jesse Jackson, who was running for president at the time. Fast forward 24 years later, it was the dream realized. We had the first African-American president who I admire deeply, I look up to, I respect him. I knew that he had an unprecedented burden placed upon his shoulders, but I also knew that he was the man for the job. And I'm proud to have supported him. I was the first out of our Indiana delegation to support him against threats, against opposition, but I was the first to support him. And so I think he's done a great job. I've worked with him on financial regulatory reform. He signed 2 of my bills into law. We worked with him with the Affordable Care Act, now known as Obamacare. We worked with him on changing how our infrastructure is and the kinds of investments that we make in the American Recovery Act. And he's done a phenomenal job. And I'm even more excited about his second term. And so I think that he's proven his detractors wrong. What he has done for African Americans in particular has been to dismantle the kind of pervasive mythology that has existed for centuries that African American or people of color are less than, that they're inferior. And he has shown that even you can have an African American or a person of color governing the wealthiest and arguably the most powerful nation in the world and still see efficiencies, still see improvements, and it's not the end of the world. In fact, it's okay. And so that opens the door for a Latino president, a woman president, a
Pakistani president.
Hello, a Muslim president one day, inshallah. Jewish
You
and
might as
otherwise.
well,
I'm staying in my lane, man. I'm trying to stay alive and stay focused.
Well, since you call yourself an honorary Pakistani.
There you go.
So if you become the president, we'll have a honorary Pakistani and a Muslim president. So
No, I'm staying in my congressional.
they'll be nice. Muslims have been here on this continent for a lot longer than most people realize. We have a special report on Muslim presence in America.
The Islamic Heritage Museum is one of the more recent additions to the list of museums in Washington, D.C. The museum is based on the research by Amir Muhammad.
Came up with this idea about 16 years ago.
He tells us that the earliest records of Muslim presence in America date back to the Spanish Inquisition. His research also shows that after Abraham Lincoln's victory in the Civil War, Union forces burned down University of Alabama, and the librarian was told to save only one book. The book that he chose to save was this Quran.
Now this Quran is an 1853 version. During the Civil War, the Union troop went down to burn down all the towns. And they went down to burn the library. And the librarian said, can we save some books? He said, no, you can save one book. That one book he ran and saved is this Quran. And it tells you this is the only book saved from the university building, which was destroyed by Syria during the Civil War. Inside this Quran we had on display, we found this genealogical chart of the Arabs, as well as a map of early Arabia and the Kaaba.
Even today, Americans equate Islam with faces like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. But could Abraham Lincoln and Elvis Presley have a Muslim ancestry?
Then you find in the 1600s, you had the Muslims that came with the Spaniards as enslaved people. They were, in Spain, they was known as Moriscos. But when they arrived here, they became later on known as Melungeons. They say that Elvis Presley's mother was a Melungeon. They say that Abraham Lincoln's mother was a Melungeons. And these Melungeons still live there today.
Research into the genealogies of these personalities has raised some interesting questions, but is inconclusive.
These are censuses that we found. You know, we found Muslims in all American censuses. This is an 1850 census, and they're free people living in California. Here's a Muhammad, 25 years old, coming from Arabia. Here's another one, living in Ohio. His name is Henry Allah, coming from Ireland. I think this is very unique. Now, he probably was a doula, but they call him Allah. Here's another one, Peter Akbar, came from Canada.
Congressman, now you're on the Armed Forces Committee. Very powerful, influential, and important committee to be on. And this is the committee which also deals with America's wars outside and lots of stuff that you're privy to.
Sure.
Drone attacks, drone strikes is a big issue in Pakistan. As a member of Congress, as a responsible member of Congress, I mean, who sits on such an important committee, have you given a serious thought to this issue, which has actually made a lot of people angry outside with this society?
It has. I think we need to have an honest discussion about drone usage. There are some, my friends who are generals, who will argue that it saves a lot of Americans' lives by taking them out of the theater of war, as it were, and placing a drone there to protect a larger force. It reduces the number of casualties that we see on the military end. However, it increases the number of casualties of civilians, as we've seen. It also raises deeper issues, not only abroad but at home, as we're seeing Homeland Security use drones to protect our borders. But the question becomes, throughout the usage of drones, might there be additional civil liberties issues that come at play if you're looking on one end at a terror suspect, but you may pick up a crime somewhere else? And so for me, I think drones have value, but that value cannot supersede the fact that too many civilians are being killed each and every day or each and every week as a result of our drone usage.
You have a beautiful family.
Alhamdulillah, thank you.
And a beautiful young daughter.
Alhamdulillah, Salima, yes.
That's a very popular name in Pakistan.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Wise.
Yeah, peace.
So, what are your aspirations for her?
She wants to be, this week, she wants to be a scientist or an astronaut. And I want to encourage her in all that she wants to do.
Do you consider that as a failure, Congressman?
Not at all. I mean, space exploration. Okay. She may lead the first effort to travel to Mars. Who knows?
So better than a congresswoman.
I think so.
Tell us something about your grandmother. I mean, here is a woman, a Christian, deeply Christian woman.
Sure.
Again, a member of Congress.
Yes.
And then you were inspired by her.
Yes.
You became Muslim.
That's right.
And this also shows, something about this society, that you inherited, in a way, quote unquote, her seat.
Sure.
So was it an issue with your constituency that, even though your faith was very well known when you reigned, and actually your opponents made a big issue out of it? So what happened? Tell us.
There were some, and there are. Well, my grandmother encouraged my study of the religion. In fact, she had a Quran in the house. She was a fan of Rumi. And so she was very aware of Islam. And even in our community, there were Muslims who were helping to service the community and to rid our communities of crime. And so that was always impressive. But my grandmother was well respected by Muslims, and she was a huge supporter of Muslims. And so for me, she embraced my reversion, and she encouraged me in a different kind of way, because I think she saw that on one end there were a lot of unmet needs that Islam met for me, and that she saw my growth and she saw me blossom as a Muslim. Not to say she didn't see it when I was a Christian, but I think she supported that, and it meant so much to me, because had she opposed it, I don't think it would have had the same kind of impact as a young man. But for her to embrace me and encourage me, I think so many more parents could do the same.
And the other part of the question we were talking about, how does it reflect on the society, the challenges in your constituency?
Well, there are some, every election I have to answer these questions about my faith, as you can imagine. But I think most of my constituents were aware many of them don't care. Given our economic downturn, they're more concerned about what can you do to bring jobs back to Indiana. You're a Muslim, we see you're not a terrorist, you worked in Homeland Security. What are you going to do about fixing our broken educational system? What are you going to do about making critical investments in our infrastructure? What are you going to do about collapsing the war effort in Afghanistan? And so I think as long as I can do my due diligence as a member of Congress and service the people, my work is a form of dawah, though that's not the objective, but it's a form of educating people and informing people about the religion and what it means to me and how being a Muslim congressman can impact and influence others. I hope to see in the next few years Muslim congressmen and women, a Muslim governor, a Muslim president. It may be a Muslim sister.
That was our show today. Next week, we are going to bring you another exclusive interview with a congressman on cybersecurity. This is Faiz Rahman. Thank you for watching.